Crosby speaking, and this is our last of our weekly rainy seasons talks, remote talks. So I hope you've all got your katanas finished, and now we're going to move on to the non-rainy season, except for here in the UK where it is really getting very wet. From today, we're going to move to a third Friday in the month talk. We are still deciding a bit about what time, because we're trying to cover the time difference and get as many people able to attend without missing too much sleep as possible. So if you would like to be notified of that, you could put your email in the chat or send your email to any of the organisers that you know, and we'll put some information in the chat so you can navigate your way back to the website that we'll advertise them on as well. So at any point during the session, if you'd like to add your email to the chat or email one of us. So now I'd like to move to the culmination of our series, the talk by Mark Allon. So Mark's invitation today stems from his important work on Pali inscriptions in Burma, as you can see. But Mark's expertise in the early canonical languages makes him one of only a few handful of people with competence, with really excellent competence in early canons, leading to his invaluable work, particularly with recent projects such as the work he does on the early Gandhari materials. This expertise reflects his background. So he's did his BA at ANU in Asian Studies in Canberra, including studying with Professor de Jong, somebody I was terrified of throughout his life. He seemed to keep a strong awareness of all the developments in the field, and he was quite a formidable person to work with. And then Mark did his PhD with Kyaw Norman at the University of Cambridge, and that and produced a wonderful book on orality, so analysing the style and the function of the Pali canon. And that's how I got to know Mark, because back then there were quite a lot of graduate students in Buddhist studies at SOAS, Cambridge and Oxford, and we set up a graduate seminar where I can't remember if it was weekly or fortnightly, and our professors were not allowed to attend. So we all discussed our research there and had really very good discussions, and Mark's work was important in getting us all to discuss ideas about orality. But also he was just a wonderful contributor personally as well. Now, Mark and I are almost exact contemporaries then in Buddhist studies, since we both began studying on different continents at the similar time. So that's when our Wasa age begins. But I was completely staggered to find out, given Mark's very youthful appearance, that before he did his first degree in Asian studies, he actually completed a degree in fine art at Sydney, in sculpture, drawing and printmaking. So now I'm convinced that the key to longevity really does exist in the early Buddhist texts. So I've followed Mark for about several decades now, and I've always been impressed by his combination of detail and linguistic ability working with early texts, with his ability to think about the big picture. I shall put in a link to some of his publications, comparing most recent one, comparing different versions of the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta. So bringing out the newly discovered or uncovered Sanskrit Agama texts. So this is really important work. Also, as well as his ability to combine the detail and the big picture, he's also a really good person to work with. The competence, his integrity and affability are just wonderful. And I was very excited to learn about his attempts also to take manuscripts back to South Asia and to restore Sanskrit studies to Pakistan. So perhaps that's something we can discuss after the talk. For now, Mark, lovely to see you again. And I don't know if you'd like to put your camera on for the beginning, but yes, welcome to the series and thank you.
No, off camera. Sorry, on me or somebody else?
For you, if you want to put your camera on just so people can see you for the beginning, that would be great.
Can you see me now?
Yeah, we can see you.
Yes.
Oh, you can. So maybe it's my
Yes.
my computer that's the problem. That's
Okay.
wonderful. All right.
So all that time, but yeah.
Over to you, Mark. That's wonderful. Thanks.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Well, thank you very much, Kate, for the nice introduction. And I'm very honoured. I didn't realise it till now that I was the final speaker in the series. It's a great idea, and you know, it's been some very good lectures. So, what I would like to talk to you about today is you know, as Kate mentioned, major projects is on the new Gandhari finds that have appeared since the 1990s, basically. But in coordination with that, you know, in parallel with that, I've been working as part of a sort of a team of scholars, and I'll introduce them in a minute, at the Kuthodaw Pagoda in Mandalay in northern Myanmar. And this is an aerial view you see here of the site. The team members, so sort of the core team members are myself, University of Sydney, Tamara Dietrich, who heads the Buddhist Studies program at Nantian Institute in Wollongong, also associated with my university. Chris Clark, who did a doctorate with me, is a PTS grant holder at the moment. He's going to produce the first volume of a new edition and translation of the Pali Abhidhamma, and he's associated with my university as well. Royce Wiles, former lecturer at Nantian Institute. Crab, project consultant. He's a PhD student of mine working on Gandhara reliquaries, but he actually has been, you know, he's owned a software company for 30 years and manages big projects, so a very competent person. Wendy Reed, our conservator, and Bob Hudson, you might know, very well-known archaeologists of Myanmar. And we have, you know, several collaborative organisations in Myanmar. First and foremost, Department of Archaeology in Mandalay, the directors, conservators, staff members, and then the Kuthodaw Pagoda Trustee Committee. We've also worked very closely with local photographers who took the images, which I'll talk about in a minute. And we're currently working with the Sidigu Institute Academy under patronage of Sidigu Sayadaw Ashin Nyanisara and his monastics. And of course, permission to actually undertake the work on this project was provided by the Ministry of Culture in Myanmar. And there's another person, you know, particularly since he's listening in, is Alexei Kirichenko, and our project was very much helped by, you know, his amazing knowledge of working in Myanmar. You know, we did some exploration of imaging and also connections with, you know, setting up the transcription project and so on. So I would like to mention him. The Mandalay, if you don't already know, is in sort of central, slightly northern present-day Myanmar. It was established as the capital in 1857 by King Mindon, the second last king of Myanmar, or Burma as it was known then. In 1859, he established the central stupa of the Kuthodaw Pagoda, which we're going to talk about today. And then between 1860 and 68, he had engraved on 729 marble-stelae, you know, about a metre tall, a bit bigger sometimes, the entire Pali canon, right? So a very impressive feat. Now, this is an aerial view of both the Kuthodaw Pagoda on the left, which was established first, and then the Sandamuni on the right, which we'll look at in a minute. The Kuthodaw Pagoda houses the entire Pali canon, and it occupies 5.2 hectares, so it's a pretty large site, very impressive site. And the Sandamuni houses the commentaries, the Pali commentaries. So here you have, aerial view. You can see the comparative sites. So, the Kuthodaw Pagoda, although as we'll see has fewer stelae, it actually occupies a bigger site. Now, in line with all, many Theravada kings and Buddhist kings, Mindon had, the whole of the Pali canon in written palm leaves. And then later in 1855, when the British Commissioner Arthur Phyo visited Mandalay, because the British had invaded southern and occupied southern Myanmar, Burma, he donated to him a full set of the canon, much of it produced by King Theravada, and that's in the British Museum, library, I should say, excuse me. But he then went further and had the entire Pali canon carved on, marble-stelae. And as far as I know, there's no precedent for this in the Theravada world, at least, particularly the whole Buddhist canon. This is a very early photo, 1907. This just gives you an idea of the size. So they vary in size and shape, but they're all approximately about this size, some a little bit taller and narrower, some a bit wider, right? And they are all housed in these individual little pagodas with 4 doors, which now bear grates, metal grates. At the center sits the main pagoda, which was established first. The marble comes from the village of Sangyan, Sagin Hills, which is upriver from Mandalay. And it's also an impressive site. The marble must have been cut and then floated down the river to the capital. It's now the village is mostly producing sculptures. Because of the sheer size of it, it claims to be the world's biggest book. That is the Kuthodaw Pagoda, even though, as I said, the Sundamuni has more stelae for the commentaries. Of course, the commentaries are bigger than the canon itself. In 2003, it was designated a UNESCO Memory of the World because of its importance, its cultural importance. And in 1871, King Mindon, so this is after the actual engraving of the stela with the Pali canon, King Mindon called the fifth, what's called the fifth Sangiti, Buddhist council, consisting of 2,400 monks to recite the canon. And supposedly then corrections were made to the actual stela themselves in light of that. The site itself is one of the most holy Buddhist sites in Myanmar. It was used from its beginning as a source for correcting texts, manuscripts, and then printed texts and so on. It is also very much a living Buddhist site with many visitors coming, international tourists, but also locals and people throughout Myanmar coming to the site itself. It's used for picnics and meetings. You get events like this quite regularly, which is a senior monastic giving a Dhamma talk under the starflower trees, which are actually planted by King Mindon. The little pagodas here witness also have a very impressive archive of donor inscriptions. So you'll see down on the plinth at the bottom here, on the walls, up near the top, the tower, and within the actual pagodas themselves. And these record things like the cleaning of the pagoda, painting, the re-inking of the inscriptions on the stela, the establishment of the metal umbrellas on top, and so on. So they're quite an important source of information about patronage of the site and religious use of the site. Now, it's, because of it was such a significant thing, it acted as an inspiration to the establishment of similar sites first and foremost throughout Myanmar itself, and then beyond elsewhere in Southeast Asia. So first and foremost was the Sandamuni Pagoda, which you saw from the aerial view, is just right next door in Mandalay, which has the entire Pali commentaries carved on, in this case, 1,774, so many more marble-stelae. And this was at the instigation of the monk U Kanti in 1913. The site it's interesting, it's much more crowded than the Kuthodaw. The stela are closer together. It would be quite difficult to photograph it, I think, because there's not much space. The quality of the marble seems to have not been as good in the engraving. Generally, to our experience, was not as good as the Kuthodaw, but that we haven't really studied that site. So this is the Sandamuni, as you can see, very similar, built clearly on the pattern of the Kuthodaw. It was also the inspiration for the establishment on marble-stelae again of both Pali and Burmese writings of the very famous, Monk Ledi Sayadaw at his monastery in Myanmar in the 1920s. Now, the connection there is that it was said that Ledi Sayadaw at the Fifth Council in 1871 recited the Abhidharma, supposedly the Kuthodaw. So, he had a direct presence at that Fifth Council. So it's perhaps no wonder that, and I don't know the history of this, the establishment of this and who instigated it, but clearly the model was there, and his involvement in the Fifth Council must have been an incentive. Photos were taken by Bill Pruitt in November 2015. This is supposedly a Quran language Tipitaka, which he took photos of. You can see it must be completed by now. So interesting, clearly again inspired by the Kuthodaw. And outside of Myanmar, then in the most perhaps best known one is in Thailand, not far from Bangkok, is Puttamonton, which consists of 1,418 marble-stelae of the Pali canon in the Thai script. And it's a very beautiful site and well visited and so on. And the most recent one I saw was actually in 2019, August, when I was in Sri Lanka. And this is at the Devram Vihara in Colombo, near just outside the capital. It was still maybe it's completed now, I'm not too certain, but it was in the process of being completed. So this is the Pali canon in Sinhalese script. So clearly, it set a precedent. But what I think is interesting, I'll talk about this a little bit later, is that, it would be very interesting to know where King Mindon got his inspiration from. Clearly there was a long history of Theravada kings, throughout the Buddhist world, having their canons committed to writing in manuscript form. In the case of Southeast Asia and Sri Lanka in palm leaf manuscripts. There was a long history of inscriptions in Myanmar itself, but to our knowledge, we have never had a record of, and I'm not aware of, a site in which the whole of the canon, or even a portion of it, was carved on stone. So the first printed edition that was said to be a faithful replication of the Kuthodaw recension was the Hantawadi Press, 38 volumes, begun supposedly in late 1800s, around 1900s, under the guidance of Mr. Philip Ripley. And we're lucky enough to be able to source many of these. They're very fragile and they're very rare from various sources, some in Myanmar itself, some through the help of the Dhammakaya Thailand, who photographed some who were photographed in Tokyo Library in Japan. So then, of course, the Kuthodaw, the Fifth Council edition, was the basis for the well-known Sixth Council edition in the 1950s, which was held in Myanmar. And but as you'll see, with differences, they introduced some differences, but it clearly took its reading, its basis from the Fifth Council edition. And then, as we know, that Buddhists are not slow to use new technologies to propagate the faith, and the Buddhists were some of the first to use the electronic medium to disseminate the Pali canon in the New World, which is that first of all it was a CD-ROM, and now it's through the internet, downloadable, and then that itself. So in other words, the Sixth Council version has also been the basis for many of the other Pali versions that are available electronically, such as the digital Pali reader, Sutta Central, and so on, who've used this as basis. So, clearly, very interesting lineage and influence that the Fifth Council had. So William Bulley, back in the 1960s, I should say, in an article already noted, and he actually did some pilot studies of the text and the site, that most of the early Burmese editions of Theravada canonical texts have the Kuthodaw version as their authentic basis. And also that the Fifth Council allows for a detailed evaluation of the Sixth Council. So what is the Sixth Council, what version, what innovations were introduced or not, and so on, right? Because that has become such a widespread and widely used version. He also makes comments in his initial study on the status of the Kuthodaw and its contribution, its differences. And he notes, and it's true, that it is a version that was uninfluenced by European editions. Of course, the Pali Text Society was founded in 1881, so it's pre that period. So that's an important thing. Whereas, as you'll see, the Sixth Council clearly had the Pali Text Society European editions in view when they produced their version. So the initial aims of the Kuthodaw project was, well, when we did an inspection, we found that we really wanted to study the text and answer many of these questions about the text and what's the status of the Fifth Council version and so on. But we realized that the actual inscriptions were quite dirty, not damaged, but whitewash and all sorts of problems. So the first task was to actually clean them and produce a conservation plan before we could digitally photograph all the inscriptions. The other was to then produce and make those images available to the wider public, and then to produce a transcription, Roman transcription of the entire text, and then to develop a digital platform in which the images and the transliterations could be dynamically linked and made publicly available. And then also we've photographed the donor inscriptions of the first 100 and plus pagodas. So quite a big archive of donor inscriptions to mount those also and make those available. So that was the first phase of the project, which is now finished. Not complete in some part, but that was funded between 2014 and 2016 by a 3-year grant from the Kyaw Academic Research Institute of the Rishoku Sekai in Japan. So very generous Japanese funding enabled us to do that. Further aims were, what I suppose, were the real value added, which is to determine the nature and status and influence of the recension of the Pali canon preserved on the Kuthodaw Pagoda site, and to compare it with, preceding manuscript traditions. So to understand, well, the Kuthodaw was a royal project. So what is a royal project? Does it differ from the manuscript tradition prior to that, royal or otherwise? Were innovations introduced? What was its influenced, and so on, and where does it sit in the transmission of Pali literature in Asia? And then also to produce an accurate account of the history of the Kuthodaw Pagoda itself, and for the reasons, to understand better the reasons for King Mindon producing the site, and the role that the invasion of southern Myanmar had on him doing this, and then also to situate the pagoda in the broader context of the history of Buddhism in Southeast Asia. And then finally to undertake a detailed study of the donor inscriptions of the site, and to better understand donor patterns and understand how the site was and is used. So, as I said, when we first encountered the site, it really needed work on it before we could actually photograph it. So the starflower trees that had been planted by Mindon had basically overgrown and induced mold, mildew on the actual pagodas. It's a huge amount of vegetation. It's tropical, so of course it just goes wild very easily. But more disturbing was there was the grates were broken. There was graffiti on the actual stelae. When they whitewashed the pagodas, the whitewash was just splattered on the actual stelae. There was bats have a habit of hanging from the roof and eating their prey, and making it, and the bat droppings is quite acidic, and it actually starts to attack the marble, wasps, animals, etc. So we took over the university's, one of the university's conservator, Wendy Reed, to make an assessment and start the work and train the Department of Archaeology conservators, workers in conservation of the site. So, that obviously was quite a big project, and the Department of Archaeology did a fantastic job. And so basically, that was finished in 2016. So the whole, 729 stelae plus this 4 historic inscriptions stelae was completed in 2016. And, I count it as one of the great pleasures to actually physically rub my hand over every face of every stela to check, because there's a lot of the time there was cement had fallen on it and stuck, and so it was actually to clean it here. I'm working with our project manager. This is a fully clean stela, so quite a beautiful thing, very nice condition. They cleaned very well. You look at the quality of the engraving, the inking, very beautiful and very nice, accurate carving and very high quality, I think. And as I said, I think that superior generally to the Sundamuni site next door. So in fact, the stela, the entire collection was photographed by Alpha Computers in 2006. However, the results were far from legible often, and I think probably maybe from the standard of the imaging, perhaps also that they hadn't cleaned properly the stela, or whatever it is. We decided that it really needed to be redone again. And in fact, I worked first initially with Alexei Kirichenko, looking at different technologies and ways of imaging this. And we settled, in fact, on a local photographer who worked for Siddhiku Sayadaw, this photographer, and he did the whole project and produced very impressive images. We have mounted the entire set on open context. So basically what we did, we took full frame images and then 2 half frame up and bottom of both sides, it's generally the case that it's highly legible. In our case, we've produced a catalogue, an initial catalogue. But as I said, what we want to do is actually mount those images in a more accessible format with metadata and so on. So that's the next phase of the project. Ashin Nyanisara Siddhiku Sayadaw was generous enough to help us set up a project with monastics from his Siddhiku Academy in Mandalay to actually start the transliteration project. So this is to produce a Roman transliteration of the Burmese script text. And it's slow work, of course, but we're making progress. And then, as I said, is to eventually try to dynamically link image and text. So as I mentioned, and Kate mentioned, I work on Gandharan manuscripts, and a consortium of universities consisting of the University of Sydney, University of Munich, University of Washington, Seattle, and University of Lausanne in Switzerland have been developing a platform called READ, Research Environment for Ancient Documents, in which image and text, exactly as the way we want it, can be dynamically linked. So we made a lot of advances, particularly with the Gandhari material, and we've only just started piloting it with this Burmese Kuthodaw material, but this is essentially what you're looking at. So, you know, as you move the stellar image, the text transliteration will scroll down, and in the case of the Gandhari, it's actually that you can actually, because the Gandhari texts are much smaller and more fragmentary, we can produce glossaries, paleographic reports, and so on of the text. But and we're going to pilot that with the Dhammapada in this case, so that we actually say you hover over a word in the actual transliteration, the text, and it'll give you the full grammatical status of that word. So it's a very good platform, pedagogical platform for learning Pali, and then also the Burmese script. And then also as you highlight a word, the actual the aksharas, the letters on the stela itself will be highlighted and bounded by boxes. So that's the Gandhari model. It would be a slightly different thing because the Pali canon here is so massive, so it would be quite a lot of work, but we may very well do that with select texts, say like this one, the Dhammapada. So to date, we have two main publications. The first was published in the Bulletin of the Kyaw Academic Research Institute. That was the funding body in 2016 by the full team. Bob Hudson, the conservator, Wendy Reed, and so on. And this really looked more at the, a little bit of the history of the site, the conservation, photographing, and so on. There's an article that's just about to come out in the next issue of the Journal of the Pali Text Society, which is by the core team of Royce Wiles, Chris Clark, Tamara, and myself. That is, this article will look really at the context for the process of the inscribing of the text of particularly the first printed edition, so the Hantawadi and other editions, what we found out about the history of that, and then also the Sixth Council, so the background to the Sixth Council, how it was formed and so on, and then a pilot study. Of select text, which I'll talk about in a minute. So, if you look at, say, the royal orders, right, those concerned with King Mindon, right, you'll get statements like this, right, so that the king prays for Buddhahood, and in working to achieve it, he follows the ways of his ancestors who were also considered future Buddhas. Or His Majesty, the defender of Buddhism, is a true descendant in the line of ancient kings and is perfect in observing the way of good kings. He is being recognized as a future Buddha. Or the king believes that he owes his kingship to various good deeds in past lives, and he wants to continue this accumulation of merit by supporting Buddhism. He considers that to have a Buddhist council would be best in that line. So this is the background, 1870 to the 1871 Buddhist Council. Or this was, again, to the background to the Buddhist Council, where he aligns himself with King Ajatasattu, who convened the first council, Kalasoka the second, Ashoka the third, Vatagamini the fourth in Sri Lanka, and so on and so on. And then his reason for, initiating the fifth Buddhist Council in 15th April 1871 with 2,400 monks and so on. So, this is very typical of Buddhist kings, of seeing himself as a Dharma king, as a supporter of the faith, of ensuring its longevity, continuance. So, first and foremost, earlier, one of the first things, like most Theravada kings, having the entire canon, written on palm leaf manuscript form, but then going on to have it carved on stone. Well, as I said, is, the precedent in Myanmar, well, there's a long history of inscriptions, mostly recording laws, land grants, and so on, foundation monasteries and the like. You think of the Kalyani inscription, going way back. But as to our knowledge, there's no precedent for the entire Pali Canon or even a significant portion of it. I mean, we have in China, there's some sites where parts of the Chinese Tripitaka were carved, but not as a one-off major project of the entire thing. It's just bits and pieces are being carved. So it would be interesting to know, we haven't discovered that yet, what set that in motion, and also what was the inspiration? What was to what extent did the British invasion of southern Myanmar, Burma at that time, instigate this? Was stone seem to be a more lasting medium than, say, palm leaf and so on? So, the initial textual research we've looked at, we've sourced the Phyo manuscripts. These are the ones that King Mindon gave Arthur Phyo in 1855, which are now in the British Library. So they predate the Kuthodaw. And then the Kuthodaw itself, the Hantawadi printed editions, the Sixth Council editions, and the European editions. So what we did is, there's 4 of us, the main scholars, so we did some pilots on 4 texts. And what we wanted to do was select texts that represent a diversity of genres, perhaps periods, and so on, to try and capture, whether there are differences in, say, the text, because it may be different texts with a responsibility to different groups of monks, different carvers, and so on. So we chose section of the Vinaya, section of the Abhidharma, so the section of the Upadana, and a section of the Majjhima Nikaya. And here you have the abbreviation. So, some of the differences, initial editions. So say in the Majjhima Nikaya, well, you'll have this. So KP is Kuthodaw Pagoda, H Hantawadi, that's the printing. Virtually in all cases, the Hantawadi is identical with the Kuthodaw. So it's quite a faithful representation, replication of that. The Chatasangayana has diverted from that on many occasions and sits more with the Pali Text Society editions, and of course, the digital Pali reader follows that. So some minor things like long, short vowel, variation, long, short vowel, very common anyway. But, the next example down, present indicative as opposed to the preterite, the past tense, or, Satu Vasena, Satu the teacher, as opposed to Tathagata, right? Or in the, this is the more or less the colophon to the Mula Pariyaya Sutta, Sutantam, as opposed to Sutta, and the Burmese Sixth Council has Suttam Nititam, so it introduces further wording. Some of the biggest differences we noticed was this was based on the work of Chris Clark, who did his doctorate on the Upadana. So this was, to read something he said, which is, the editors of the Kuthodaw Pagoda recension, which represents a thoroughly revised version of the Pali Canon made during the founding years of Mandalay, have amended the received text in order to avoid hypermetrical padas wherever possible. That is, for those of you who don't know, in, say, Anushtoba Shloka meter, where padas, the feet, you have 4 feet, they consist of between 8 normally or 9 sometimes. 9 is considered hypermetrical. So it's very common for them to actually dislike that and to reduce it, to change the wording slightly to make it a nice, neat 8 syllables. And that seems to be an interesting phenomenon, right? And some of the examples you have here, which I won't read out, sometimes also harmonizing the text with other texts throughout the canon. So another interesting thing is something I noticed in the what's called the Udana. Udanas are mnemonic verses that key out the components of a textual unit. So, so the whole of the Dhammapada has a Vag Udana, that is an Udana mnemonic verse, the listing by keywords of the chapter headings, right, of the chapters of the Dhammapada. And then within each chapter, you can have Awdanas as well. And that's very common. So in this case, the Kuthodaw and the Sixth Council are completely different. Now, this might be because these aspects of the text are considered to be paratextual. That is, they're not the core text themselves, but they are the setting, the information about it. But nonetheless, interesting, these sorts of differences. So, you know, some of the preliminary findings that will be published in this forthcoming article is that there are minor differences between the earlier royal manuscripts and the Kuthodaw Pagoda recension that include variation in vowel length, the use of anuswara against the class nasals, variation between the phonemes, dental ta and retroflex. The Apadana appears to contain more variant readings among its witnesses than other texts selected for this investigation, indicating that in comparing different editions of manuscripts, each text may reflect different sources and idiosyncrasies of transmission. This is what I was saying. So it's very important to take a selection of texts to capture this type of thing. So although the Hantawadi printing, the first printing, is generally the same as Kuthodaw Pagoda recension, it's not always the case. The Kuthodaw version represents a thoroughly Burmese recension, while the Chattasanggayana Sixth Council is based on the Kuthodaw, as well as a number of printed editions. Most importantly, it appears it never used manuscripts. So the Sixth Council seems to introduce changes silently without documenting it that differ from the Fifth Council. The Sixth Council also reflects influences from the European editions, it having regularized the text, insertion of T, the quotative particle, inclusion of words like nititam, as we saw, this is finished, inclusion of readings from different non-Burmese transmission line. So in the case of the Apadana, Clark's conclusions were that the Chattasanggayana version Sixth Council's favoured readings that produce an orthographically consistent text and that better reflects the corresponding Sanskrit. It produced metrically standard shloka verses containing 8-syllable padas and avoids unusual rare grammatical forms, and it produces sentences that are more comprehensible. So, future aims of the project, I've already been over that, and I've sort of spoken over time a little bit, but, this is the first phase of the project. It's a work in progress, I should say. We have just applied for a major Australian research grant to sort of undertake this next phase of the project. Thank you. So, Kate, do I stop sharing my screen now, or maybe
it might be an idea to leave it in case people have questions in relation to specific parts. Thank you, Mark, for such a wonderful talk, so informative, and also letting us know about really useful resources. I'm going to hand over to Olivia Porter for questions, but before I do that, I believe Oxford Sayadaw Venerable Professor Dhammasamy wanted to say a few words.
I believe you're still muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, thank
you. Thank you, sorry. Thank you, Professor Kate Crosby, especially for organizing this series of lecture. And also today, Professor Allon, for this wonderful lecture. I'd like to thank every organizers and every participant. One thing that I'd like to just add in and give you some information, maybe related or maybe not related to this. At the moment, okay, I think we started a little bit before your project, but we haven't gone much further. This project is the digitization project that also involves Siddhagu, Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. We'd like to bring all the digital projects together.
Yes.
And we call this the Union Catalog of Buddhist Texts.
Okay.
So it's an online catalog project. The Tibetans, they have done that and is hosted at the University of West Virginia. The Chinese, they have CBETA project, and they have done that, they have completed that as well. But the Theravada project, okay, we have not been able to follow that up. So we started actually talking about this in 2009 in Vietnam. The central player is Chulalongkorn University and happened to be one of the co-chairman on this project. And first, we would like to bring the Thai Pali edition to be part of this, and later bring in more versions such as the Burmese and the Sinhalese. But there have been some problem. So now the main task is taking place in Myanmar at Siddhagu in Sakai, and sponsored by Siddhagu and by Shan State Buddhist University. So I just like to share with you this one. Thank you.
That's very good. Thank you. Yes. Look, we are very much in the digital age, and there are quite a lot of different centers that are, inputting various Buddhist texts, and they're sort of in different place, different conditions. You may know that the Sri Lankan Buddha Janji Tripitaka series is available on the internet. It probably needs more proofreading. The Thai version, Mahidol University produced a CD-ROM. Don't know quite where that is up to now. The PTS edition through Gretel, German sites available. And of course, the Burmese has been available for quite some time through the Vipassana Research Institute CD-ROMs. Now,
yes, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for telling me.
Hi everybody, it's Olivia here. If you look at the floating ribbon, you can see the hand sign in case anybody wants to raise their hand to ask questions. And I can already see there's a question in the chat from Phyo who asks, she says, thank you for the lecture, it's very interesting. On the Open Context website, there's some permissions that are required. Will that content at some point become public?
Yes, so our plan is early next year to release the whole archive of images. We had hoped that we would have the transliteration project finished, and as I said, is to connect the images and the transliteration. That's actually the next phase of the project. So what we might do is release the images. People can. I've already shared some of the images with people. Because the next phase will take some time. So we would like to, early next year, as I said, make the images more readily available, and then we'll work, particularly if we get this funding, to actually finish the transliteration project and to dynamically link the images and the transliteration in an appropriate site. So yes.
That'd be a really amazing resource. Are there any more questions? People can feel free to unmute themselves and just ask. Oh, there's a question from Anthony Scott.
Hello, Anthony.
Hello, Professor. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation and all the work that you have done on this. I think it will benefit many people, researchers and others alike. My question has to do with the possibility of King Mindon consulting any other canons from different Theravada countries within the region, and whether or not those may have kind of influenced the different versions, at least in terms of the palm leaf versions that eventually went into the Kuthodaw site. And the second thing is whether or not you have checked local universities, because I know that there's quite a bit of PhD theses. At least I have two that I can send you by email, but there's some excellent theses that people have written over the last 10 years on the Fifth Council and the Sixth Council. And so the only, yeah, that's something I would really, next time you go, or any one of your colleagues go, or anyone listening today, if they have access to that, because there's a lot of resources, and of course it's difficult for non-native Burmese speakers to go through that carefully.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and if you can send me the links or send me those, that would be wonderful. As to the first question, we're not aware of that, but it doesn't say that it didn't happen. You know, kings were generally aware of their neighbours and what's going on, but and maybe somebody who's better aware of the history of monastic interchange and interconnection throughout Southeast Asia, Sri Lanka, would be able to answer that. But so far, we haven't found evidence of that, nor in the readings that we've been looking at. But that's to not say they may not turn up. You know, we really need to look at a wider field at sort of the reading of the Kuthodaw compared to not only the royal editions that preceded it, but other Myanmar, and then what's going on elsewhere. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Kate just asks, would you be able to share that information in the chat? And we have a question from Angela who says, thank you for the fascinating lecture. Is there any evidence for how Mindon chose this particular location as the site for the Kuthodaw Pagoda?
Yes, there must be. I'm not aware of it. So that's something that we haven't yet really looked into, is the full history, sourcing historical documents. Again, that's, you know, the second phase. So I'm not aware of it, but that's not to say it's not there. What were the reasons for choosing this site? I mean, clearly perhaps the threat from the south of the British must have influenced it. It's on the river. It's a very good location. You know, there's a bunch of, you know, capitals that cycle through this area. So all of these factors must have had a part to play, but I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from Adam, who says, thank you very much indeed. The textual normalizations that have been implemented for the Kuthodaw recension, I wonder if it is currently known whether these normalizations were also copied into the slabs for the commentaries at the Sandamuni, if/where the Sutto words or lines were quoted in the commentaries.
Yes, that's an interesting question. We really have not looked at the Sandamuni. We inspected the site with a prospect of doing what we did at the Kuthodaw there, and just sort of threw up our hands because it's many more stelae. It's the Kuthodaw itself, just the work I showed you there, that was a big project. So there's many more stelae at the Sandamuni. They're actually in worse condition. Many of them were re-inked and badly re-inked, right? And I think by people who just couldn't read Pali. So there's incompetent inking. Photographing them would be quite difficult because the space between them is quite small and cramped. So you would, I think, almost have to probably do physical inspection, and, you know, it would be a case of doing some pilot studies. So, you know, if anybody wants to take on that project, you know, welcome to do it, and we can lend them whatever help we have and knowledge about bringing such a project to fruition.
Great. We've got a question from Venerable Dhammasami.
I just would like to add something, maybe speculation about the choice of the place. Geographically, if you look at Kuthodaw, okay, it's between the Mandalay Hill and the palace.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. if you look at the history of Mandalay, you will see that many people, especially the learned and the monks, okay, were against the king, moving his capital to Mandalay. Okay, he was consecrated not in Mandalay but in Amarapura, about 8 miles away.
Yeah.
But because he overthrew his half brother and came to the throne, so I think for security reason he needed to move away. So he chose this, and in the process of arguing for the new site of the capital, he said the Buddha, okay, predicted that Mandalay would be a Buddhist capital. So you can see now a standing Buddha pointing his finger onto Mandalay.
Yes.
So this is King Mindong's way of arguing, okay, using Buddhist authority to argue against his court people and senior monks. Then, as a result, okay, because Mandalay in his argument is featured in the prediction of the Buddha, so any important thing has to be around that. So Kuthodaw is at the foothill of Mandalay Hill. And another thing is the office of the Supreme Council of Monks, what we call Tathanapai office, okay, situated there. It was situated there. So the Fifth Buddhist Council, Panchama Sanghana, took place there. So it's natural that Kuthodaw was chosen over there.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for letting me know.
Are there any more questions? Kate, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you. I was interested by the sites that have been inspired by this, and I wondered if are these kind of individual undertakings or collective undertakings? How do how do they relate to what's going on in those areas? There were some intriguing examples. The Karen one and the Sri Lankan one. It'd be good to go back to those slides and just have a quick look again at those, if that's all right as well.
Yeah. Now I've just got to make sure I can do the technology to actually go back. There must be a quicker way of moving through these, but I don't know it. Okay, so this is the Devram in so interesting just to bump into this. Actually, it was the monk, Australian monk, Venerable Shujato, who knew about it and took me there. So, you know, it's very interesting here. Again, I don't know much about the history of these sites. We haven't really looked into them. That's sort of like another research project in some ways. But my understanding was that this particular vihara is run, maybe even established by a dynamic young monk. And, you know, he clearly, you know, this is, you know, he wants to do something significant, and this is a good idea. Now, how he knew about it, you know, that maybe it's a common knowledge in the Theravada world that there is the entire canon carved on, you know, marble-stelae in Mandalay. I just don't know. I never met him, so I didn't get a chance to talk to him, and I don't know about the, you know, the background to this, but there must be one. He's a living monk, so it would be very easy to go and ask him, and that would be an interesting thing. I just didn't have the opportunity. This one here, again, Puttamonton, I only just bumped into it by chance. when there was the World Sanskrit Conference in Bangkok, and then somebody told me about it, so we went out to this site. Again, it's pretty recent, 57, so there must be, foundation stories about that, background historical documents. And also, it'd be interesting to know if they were inspired by Kuthodaw, what innovations they introduced, why, what they took, what they didn't take, things like that. Then
yes, and how much it relates to the strong links, other links between Burma and Thailand at the time, like the introduction of Abhidhamma teacher and
yes, indeed. Yes, that's a very interesting question. Was it, as we know, there's monks coming and going between these countries all the time historically, all the way back. So yes, shared knowledge. But in this particular case, was this, was there really that connection, or had somebody been there, and so on, and then been inspired by it? So not too certain. This one, again, I really don't know the backgrounds to this. Bill just brought it to my attention and sent me some photos. But interesting. I haven't even been able to verify that's in the Karen language, but I trust Bill that that's the case. So that's interesting that it's actually not a Pali version, but a Karen version. I don't even know where it is actually, and haven't been there. This one, the connection's a little bit more obvious, as I mentioned. This is the writings, both Burmese and Pali writings of Ledi Sayadaw. As I mentioned, he is said to have recited the part of the Abhidhamma at the Fifth Council in 1871. So he was there. He had an intimate connection with the actual stela themselves, and it's part of that lineage. So apart from the Sundamuni, this is the second one I'm aware of in Myanmar after the Sundamuni. And then this is not the whole Pali canon, it's really his writing. So that's a shift again in the actual, use of the idea, right?
Thank you. If I may just ask also, around this time we start seeing mention of terms we associate with Mahayana, such as bodhicitta and Mahayana itself in Pali text. And I'm never clear on whether that's coming out of kind of more global studies at the time, like Pali studies in Calcutta, or whether that's an influence from East Asia. And I don't know if you or anyone else knows. And, and although you didn't say what you think the inspiration may be, that it's a question, I wonder what your thinking about that has been, if you could say a little bit more about that.
As you know, Myanmar clearly has close physical trade, cultural connections with China. It's just north and then you're there, right? I remember when I was in Myanmar, I think it was the first time, and there were, Chinese engineers laying a pipeline down through the north. Similarly, if you go to the Sunyin Hills, where the marble quarries, the vast majority of the images are actually Avalokiteshvaras and their Chinese patrons who are asking for this material, right? Of course, you go to Mandalay and you'll see, lots of standard Theravada Burmese Buddha Rupas, but at that site where they're carving it, it seems that there's strong patronage from Chinese communities, whether they're in Myanmar itself, but I think more likely China. So strong connections. This is very recent. So I did raise the issue of, well, you do have, I think it's Wushan Mountain in China, where what you have there is not a single instance of a whole of the Pali canon, the Chinese Tipitaka carved on marble, stelae or whatever, but these are stone, and it seems as though different patrons, donors, would sponsor the carving of their favorite text or group of texts. so over a long period of time, and you know, so you have duplication of texts, and it's not an organized site as far as I understand. So, you know, but you know, maybe Mindon knew about that. You know, there must have been cultural ties with China. And then again, you know, ideas don't have to come from somewhere else. You know, it's, you know, Burmese kings have been, you know, instigating the writing of the Pali canon on palm leaf for centuries. And there was a long history, as I showed, of stone inscriptions in Myanmar, and, you know, sort of Mindon put one and one together. I just don't know. We just haven't found any description or written evidence for that. It's unclear what historical documents actually survive. I believe quite a lot was destroyed when the British took Mandalay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we've got another question from Anthony Scott.
Yes, thank you. I'm putting a link in the chat to a Dropbox to those theses that I mentioned, just because most of them are photographs that I took at Mandalay University and Yangon University. But I mean, I really encourage to check out the state Pariyati Sasana universities as well. And there's a lot of great stuff in there. The question though that I had was, there's a certain, like in Bode's article mentions that there's a layout to how they place these in there. So what was the first set of text that they put in? What was the last set of text? And what was the significance of the way that they actually put the text into the Kuthodaw Pagoda?
Yes, so sorry, that's not that one. Actually, I can't accurately give you an answer to that, but we do have an answer. Chris Clark, one of our key members, has done quite a lot of work on that, looking at the, so what he's done is produced a transcription, translated many of the, you know, there's little colophons on each of the stelae, and it tells what the dates and stuff like that. And he actually is building up an idea of what was the sequence, because it's not straightforward at all. It's not start with the Vinaya, move out to the, you know, the Sudapitaka, then the Abhidharma. It doesn't go like that at all. And actually there's points at which it reverses direction. So I'm afraid I can't give you the full results of his study. It's a work in progress, but that he's working on that, and I think he will publish it. So it's a pity he's not here, but he would be able to give you a better idea of that. So if you want an answer straight away, then you write to Chris. I can give you his email. But that's certainly an interesting topic. Is, you know, where did they start? What was the logic to the sequence? You know, we had talked about also, you know, when you look at it, it's, you know, dare we say it's a mandala? You know, what's the ideas going on here? Is there something of this dimension coming to play? Orientation, placement of the site in relationship to the palace, you know, which direction is the best, and so on. All of these still work in progress, but Chris Clark would be the best to answer that.
Thank you. We have a question from Yun Xia, who says, thank you for the talk about the wonderful project. Was the text of these inscriptions transliterated into Burmese from the Pali canon, or translated into Burmese? Which version is more popular for the monastery? Which is more sacred for local people, in Burmese or Pali?
I'm not certain about the question, but the text on the stelae, on the marble slabs, is Pali in Burmese script. We are instigating a project with the Sitagur Academy to transliterate that Pali text into Roman script. So that's our project. I'm not aware of a Burmese translation of the Kuthodaw text itself. There are, of course, Burmese translations of the Tipitaka, but I assume it's based on, well, at least post the 50s on the Sixth Council version. What did happen was that once the Sixth Council was printed and published, the Fifth Council seemed to have just been forgotten, right? It was, you know, the printed book was much more available, and this is tradition of, you know, the Sixth Council supposedly, and each council supposedly is, you know, a process of eliminating errors and making a better reading, a better text. So as far as we're aware, once the Sixth Council version came on the scene, that becomes the standard version that's used. It was the version that was used to produce the, you know, Vipassana Research Institute first digital edition, and then all these other subsequent electronic versions that are available. But, you know, there are, you know, Burmese translations, others would know better than myself, of Pali texts that precede that.
Thank you. We've got a question from Angela who says, given the stelae are housed in individual pagodas, it would seem they are being honoured in the same way as Buddha statues, the usual object we would expect to see inside of pagodas. Are there earlier examples of texts in Myanmar being honoured as objects of veneration in this way?
I'm not aware of it. So, well, one, you know, as I said, we're not aware of text, full text being carved on marble-stelae and then in addition housed in an individual little, you know, pagoda stupa. But there is, of course, within the Buddhist world, you know, across Asia, long history of, you know, interring manuscripts in stupas, of you know, putting manuscript or sayings, Paticcasamuppada formulas in statues and so on. So, you know, there's a long history of treating the Buddha's words as, you know, the Buddha. And this goes back to the Buddha himself, which is, you know, he says that, you know, he who sees the Dhamma sees me, and who sees me, sees the Dhamma. And, you know, this is something that we're seeing very much in Gandhara, where some of the big collections I'm working on were, or one of the main collections, senior collection, you know, a selection anthology of suttas, mostly from the parallel to the Pali Samyutta Nikaya, written out as a meritorious act, rolled up, never really read, put into a pot, interred in a stupa. That makes that site sacred, and it brings the Buddha present to that place. So I think throughout Asia generally there's been a long tradition, Mongolia, you know, interring manuscripts in stupas and so on. But as I said, I'm not aware of this. This seems to be, you know, he really set a precedent, Mindon, by doing what he did, right? Not just the whole canon, but even, you know, full texts on marble-stelae of this size, and then in addition within individual pagodas.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? If not, Kate, if you're still here, would you like to give any closing remarks? You posted some info in the chat for everybody.
I think Kate's left a chat saying apologies in that I would have to leave.
Oh, she's left.
Yeah. So.
Hi. Sorry.
Oh, you're there. There we go.
I'm just getting ready for my class, so just switching over. Thank you so much, Mark. Yes, if I could just say what a wonderful culmination to the series this is. Thank you very much for giving the talk, and also for the work involved. So I cannot believe you have managed both your Gandhari work and this work at the same time, both huge projects, and we are learning so much from them.
I must just say to that, Kate, that I really must emphasize this is a group project. So
and that was very nice
it's
too.
Not my project. It's you know, particularly the core scholars of Chris Clark, Tamara Dietrich and Royce Wiles, who are not here. So I'm the spokesperson for them. Yeah.
And the Gandhari work is also involved a lot of collaboration, and I do think that's one of your skills, your gifts, is your ability to collaborate, and the greater whole that brings to work in our field. So I think that's all the more to your credit. So thank you very much for that. Thank you to our audience also. So some people have come throughout the entire series, and much merit to you for that. And I just want to finally thank Angela, P, and Olivia again, if I may. I will leave. I don't know if Mark has time to carry on for any informal chat. We will end the recording now. But I've just